It's nice to see people in person. Can I just get a sense of what you do? How many of you are engineers? Wow, cool. Biomedical engineers or IEEEs or
I'm just
okay. What's that?
I'm just graduating.
Cool. Are they going to do a master's in something?
Maybe in the future, but
Yeah.
I need a job first.
Yeah, it's good. And then how many are other kinds of people like med students or pre-med students? Anyone? Yeah, cool. And how many are physicians? Excellent. Okay, and how many of you are in fellowship or residency? Yeah, okay, cool. All right, because one of the really important things to know is like who you're talking to, right? Because it determines um, the bandwidth, the frequency, the communication style. And it's really important to get that right. Now, I'm an interventional neuroradiologist. Since about 1992, I've done brain and spine procedures. Now I do mainly spine procedures. I see about 900 patients a year. I treat about 600. And as well as I do diagnostic neuroradiology like the rest of my colleagues. Most of my patients have metastatic disease in their spine or osteoporotic disease in their spine. Very small number have degenerative disease. Um, and I have 2 research days a week, and I work clinically 3 days a week. But it's a 7-day week, right? So it's a continuum. And so you work, well, it's not work most of the time, it's just a continuum. And so I do a lot of things. And I tried to capture this recently in a book called The Essence of Invention, The Joy of Creativity in Medicine. Because medicine is a really creative thing. And we tend not to think of it as creative in the same way as we think of Lady Gaga or, Prince or a great movie director or a writer like Murakami or somebody like that. But the creativity we express in medicine, I think, comes from the same place as other creative people. We just manifest it in a different way. And the drivers for us are different. The things that make us creative usually are clinical problems, sometimes things that piss us off. Like I have diseases I hate. I hate hydrocephalus. We're shit at looking after hydrocephalus. Those devices have 100% 5-year failure rate. And, and nobody seems to care. It really bothers me. And why is that? Well, my cousin Oliver had untreated hydrocephalus when I was a child in Dublin. He had one of those huge balloon-like heads with the doll's eyes. And he never got shunted, and he died of that. That may be why, but also all the time as a neuroradiologist, I see shunt failure studies. And so you see these things that are done egregiously badly. And often, as doctors, we kind of think they should do something. They, who are they? We are actually they. We live in one of the most lovely countries in the world at the apex of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if anybody's going to do something about issues that piss you off, it should be us, right? And we should engage. So medicine gives us opportunity, a huge word. Opportunity is so important in your lives. Opportunity to do something, opportunity to work or to do a master's or to get into med school. And it also gives you obligation to do something and feel responsible to do something and make medicine better. So I'm just going to sprinkle through this talk thoughts like that, which I put in that book. And the reason I wrote that book was we had a puppy called Alfie, and Alfie likes to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and Alfie has opinions. He's a golden retriever. So suddenly I was up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'm not normally awake that early, but I had an extra hour every day. And if I pick up my phone, Alfie goes away. If I don't put up the phone, Alfie stays and plays with me. It's very smart dog. And this sort of taught me over the last 3 years that one of the things we have to do as sentient people is to manage the signal-to-noise ratio in our heads. And we need to manage our inner voice, our inner creativity, and prevent interruptions in that because it interferes with our productivity. This might sound weird, but I've gone increasingly analog. And I drive a nearly analog car. I do not wear a smartwatch. I do not need any more. I'm already ADHD enough. I do not need more distractions. My daughter tells me that if I was in school now, I would have been put on something like Adderall. But a lot of creative people would have been. So we have to manage that signal to noise ratio in our head so that we can think through things. You can't have great ideas if you don't have the time to think about them deeply. And for most of us, the only time we get left alone is on an airplane. And you know, the longer the flight, the more creative we can be. So I don't use a smartwatch. I use fountain pens. And it's a joy to write with them. This is just a $20 Lame fountain pen. I have a bunch of them around the house with reading glasses. And I use notebooks. I have notebooks all around the place. Because sometimes we have ideas and we forget we had them. And you come back across them later and go, oh, that was pretty good, actually. Or, you know, it's just like you write something and you come back and you read and you go, did I really say that? That was good. You know, so I think, or it might be bad, equally, but, you know, I think it's very important for you to do that. And the best time of the day to be creative is first thing in the morning. When you've had some sleep, you're having your first cup of coffee, probably one of many. For me, caffeine is a performance enhancing drug. And you use that window of time and you stay away from your phone. Because once you pick up your phone, Google interrupts, BBC interrupts, work interrupts, other stuff, and there's noise. So just like MRI, humans have signal to noise ratios, and we need to manage that. So first thing in the morning, try and carve out some time just to think. Now, I would never go so far as to call it meditation, because I'm crap at that. I used to live in a Tibetan monastery, and I wrote about that and published in the BMJ and things about that, and I speak Tibetan. But I'm terrible at meditation. So that's just something for you to think about. Now, so creativity in general comes from, in medicine, from a need, from pressure, from obligation, and often from guilt. As physicians, we do things sometimes that go badly. We can't save somebody. They're too sick. They have a ruptured aneurysm and a Fisher grade 4 subarachnoid hemorrhage. There's blood everywhere. They get vasospasm, hydrocephalus, they die. And you can't do anything. Or sometimes we have complications. And all of us have a graveyard. A great French physician, Lariche, said all surgeons have a graveyard. And mine is a small graveyard, but it does exist. And that's after 30 years. And that's some complications that occur in the angio suite. And, you know, when you're coiling an aneurysm, an erupted aneurysm, you're dealing with somebody with a 50 to 60% mortality in the first 24 hours. And we can reduce it to 1 or 2%. But there's still 1 or 2%. And if you're doing 100 a year, that's going to happen every year. And these things motivate you to want to make something better. And that's the force that drives most of us, not money. And I think that's something that these VC groups, PE firms, and even innovation centers don't get. Most physicians are motivated by guilt and a sense of duty. And if you look at people like Laser Greenfield, the University of Michigan, the inventor of the Greenfield filter, it's a way of trapping clots in the IVC, the inferior vena cava, to prevent clots going to the lungs and causing pulmonary embolus. His motivation came from seeing a young man with a motorcycle accident, bilateral lower extremity trauma, fixed the limbs, but then a few days later, the kid got DVTs from their legs, embolized to the lungs, and died of PE. And he never wanted to see that happen again. So we went to a bar, clearly to drink, and met a friend there who worked in the oil and gas industry. He told him about what had happened, why he was drinking bourbon. And the friend said, well, you know, in our pipelines, we use filters. These big filters trap sludge. And the two of them developed this filter trapping device that is deployed, made of nitinol, in the inferior vena cava. Now they're retrievable to stop that problem happening. So here you see guilt, but also you see the power of two. Friendship and two brains solving a problem better than one brain. And this also happens very commonly. Just as you have Steve Jobs and Wozniak, or Gates and Allen, the Beatles, McCartney and Lennon. There are many examples of the power of two. When you're developing something, you may have a friend who pushes you further, or you're having a shit day and they're not having a shit day. Now, if you're both having a shit day, you've got a problem. But the power of two is often very useful, particularly if your skills are complementary in device development. So I'm just going to mention those kind of things to you, and that's what I wrote about in that book. And it's fun to have done that. I never thought I'd get to do that. And then I put these slides together to mention some other thoughts. Come in. As long as you're at the right lecture, like. So my daughter just finished a master's in Cambridge. And Cambridge is amazing because, it's 1,000 years of education. Sixth largest landowner in England. Phenomenal depth of wealth and resources. We have nothing that competes with that in this country. It's like the NFL by comparison to the CFL. And so I teach in neuroanatomy there twice a year. One of my former fellows is there. And he has Charles Darwin's office. And it's unchanged since the 1850s. It's as uncomfortable as it was back then. But, we know about the origin of species, we know about evolution, but what most of you don't know is Darwin wrote 6 editions of that book. His book evolved over time too. And most of the devices we develop will evolve over time as well. There isn't one version that works and there's only one version. That doesn't happen. So even Darwin had to evolve his book, and his work centered around birds. This is the room. It really is a bit shabby, but it's exactly the same. There's a bed in the corner, and Jonathan Gillard, my former fellow, sees his students there, and they do the Cambridge thing of sitting for an hour or two and talking, and says, "See Darwin" over the door, and it's all brilliant. But one of the things that happens repeatedly is our hobbies inform our inventions. And this was the same with Darwin. Darwin had a tremendous interest in pigeons before he went on the Beagle on his voyage. So his other interests were really, really important. And his pigeon breeding, because he raised pigeons, he bred pigeons to be faster. He understood by having pigeons interact, he could breed faster pigeons. So he already was thinking about evolution before he even got on that boat. And he was on that boat for 6 years, getting to the Galapagos. It took my family and I about 13 hours to get there. But his hobby really influenced him when he started to look at the beaks of finches, right? And he realized that on different islands in the Galapagos, their beaks varied with the food source as they had adapted to the micro ecosystem that they were in. Similarly, if you look at medicine, you see the same kind of thing. Our hobbies inform how we invent. So what you read is actually really, really important in how you form your mind. The French call that la formation, the formation of the brain, right? So read broadly. Don't just read medicine. Read about the Audubon Society, read Wired Magazine, read Fast Company, read The Economist, particularly read the FT weekend edition, the Life and Arts section of the Financial Times. It's that orange newspaper. I've been doing that for about 10, 15 years, and it's changed what I read because you have random information, not information presented to you by Google based on what you're already interested in. You want to learn things you don't know. And that will really influence how you form your mind and your thoughts. So these beaks, he looked at these, he knew that he could breed these birds, he knew what influenced them, and that led to his concepts around evolution, which was a slow burn. Most people think that ideas or inventions come from an inspirational moment, like the Zen Buddhist concept of Satori, a moment of great insight. That is incredibly rare. It is usually the assimilation of different thoughts, maybe opposing thoughts, that result in a new device being developed. Now, I view angiographic catheters in the same way as those beaks. You know, it began in 1928 in Portugal with a guy called Igas Moniz. He did cerebral angiography via direct puncture. The first 8 patients died. And then it evolved from there, all in Portugal, in a brief window of incandescence in that city when the intellectual environment was optimal. It was when the king had stepped down. It was before Salazar, the fascist, came into power. And you had these artistic, well-educated physicians with well-formed minds who had traveled broadly to learn, working in one hospital, who developed angiography by integrating X-rays and X-ray dye, and then catheters and accessing the IVC, the heart, and the carotids, and doing angiography. And then it disappeared once the fascists arrived and all these people scattered all over the globe. And this was at a time when physicians could be people of letters, and that was not seen as a lack of focus, but in fact, an advantage. Often now, if you have diverse interests, you're seen not to be committed. In fact, I think it should be the opposite. Those interests inform you and make you a better educated, more compassionate physician. So just like those beaks and those birds, you see catheter shapes. And all of these are named after people. Individuals made these, humans made these, bothered, guilty humans made these, and their names are on these catheters, Junkins or, Somme, etc. People I know made these catheters, and Newton and Potts, Chuck Herbert, former fighter pilot, flew in Vietnam, and they made these things to try and access catheter vessels more easily, more safely, and do angiography. So this is an interesting part of the evolution of the field. The other stereotype is it's the lone inventor who does this. This is a German painter. I think something like Caspar Friedrich is his name. Wasn't a very good person, but this is a classic kind of idolization of the lone inventor. Again, not true. Mostly a collaboration, a group of people, often 2 people working together. And for me, I do most of that in Utah. I go to Salt Lake, Utah. I have a group of friends there I work with. We prototype there. It's cheap, it's cost effective, and they've done it often. And it's hard to find those kind of resources in Canada. Most of the big companies like Beck and Dickinson, who now own Bard or Cook or Angio-Dynamics, Merit Medical, have their manufacturing there, and a lot of their stuff is OEM there. And the University of Utah is a wonderful place for biomedical engineering. The kids there go on mission because they're largely Mormon, so they learn other languages. And often they're recruited by medtech companies to work for them. So probably 4 of the top 6 medtech companies are run by people from Utah. This is the first successful cerebral angiogram by Moniz, and he showed that cavernous aneurysm. Next concept I want to give you is that ideas have genealogies. It's very rare for an idea not to have a precursor. So just like families have genealogies, or mathematics, and in mathematics, when you do a PhD, you get a number because you're a descendant of the original 3 people. So you'll be in the tens of thousands now, but you're a descendant of the founders of the field. In medicine, we belong to schools. There are different schools. I belong to the Interventional Neuro School of Jean-Jacques Merlon, who was a very quietly spoken person in Paris. He was so quietly spoken, you could barely hear him if he spoke at a meeting. And there's a lineage of people, like the Fibonacci series, that comes from these teachers. But their behavior, their kindness, kind of propagates through the school. And that's a really important thing. I've always seen somebody's an asshole. It's a sign of weakness. And it just means they're not competent. And it's almost invariably true. But so genealogies for ideas, and if you look at angiography, you can do this by looking, say, at Grunzig's angioplasty balloon, followed by Palmaz's stent, followed by Lindsay McCann's drug-eluting stent, followed by the monorail delivery system developed by that fellow at Stanford. And you can see the lineage of the ideas and the the inheritance of that. Rarely something comes out of left field. It makes no sense. And then you're dealing with kind of quantum mechanics level brilliance. Actually, I was looking around the room thinking, you reminded me of the Heisenberg principle. You know, the bus seat rule, where electrons occupy a shell when they're on their own before they sit beside somebody else. But if you think of the level of brilliance of the initial quantum physicists at the Solvay meeting in like 1918 or whatever, when an idea in medicine has no precursor, then you're dealing with something really inspirational, rare, like a rare earth element in the periodic table. There's a thing I'm involved in called ozone in herniated discs. Comes from Italy, a fellow called Mario Monco decided to put O3 in contained herniated discs. We can have 73% of people avoid open surgery. Why did he come up with that idea? I have no idea. He has no idea. But after 19 years work together, we're about to get Health Canada approval and move a pathway at the FDA. So when an idea is really, really unusual, it takes longer. And when the healthcare system you work in is conservative, like Canada, it takes longer. If your idea aligns with pre-existing belief systems, you get more rapid adoption by physicians. If it's reimbursable, you get really rapid adoption. If it's not reimbursed and there isn't a CPT code, there isn't an ICD-9 code, Medicare hates it, CMS hates it, then you've got an uphill battle. So I worked with a wonderful young lady who is a techno-anthropologist. And she helps my language when I talk about novel things align with pre-existing belief systems to ensure more rapid adoption, which is kind of cool, right? But you don't think of technology having an anthropology, but it does. So weird stuff, really novel stuff, brilliant stuff takes longer than iterative stuff that is billable and will be rapidly adopted. American hospital systems largely run by physicians, more risk tolerant, more likely to adopt new technology because patients are looking for that. Canadian healthcare systems run by administrators with Excel files who consider us a cost center, really unlikely to adopt new technology. I have many devices that I've invented, got through the FDA, that I have not bothered to get Health Canada approval for. And there are many companies who use the special access program primarily because trying to get through Health Canada is such a nightmare. And they're one of the big hindrances for any startup in Canada. And they should be ashamed of themselves. Initially, when you invent something, you have to map out the route. You have to figure out the inclusion-exclusion criteria. And then you teach it to other people and you make maps and they follow what you do. And we do this by teaching. Initially, it's one-to-one teaching. You teach your fellow. And your fellow goes, okay, this is good. And then your fellow leaves and brings that skill with them. And they teach somebody there. And then it grows, again, like the Fibonacci series. Or you go to a meeting. And if you have a good reputation and you're a verascible, sustainably reliable opinion, not somebody who can be bought by industry, people will believe what you say. You present peer-reviewed publications, you have good science, and your idea gets adopted. It takes time. It takes somewhere between like 11 and 15 years for new ideas to be really permeated into the medical system. And when you perform those procedures, you require focus and you require teams, right? So you got to train the team around you to do this efficiently. There are windows when new ideas occur. And so I was curious about this. I was afraid that too many bright physicians were going into industry to pursue money instead of pursuing ideas. And so I looked at windows of burst filings of patents at the USPTO and PCT, and I found that most physicians filed patents after major wars. So after the Vietnam War, after the Korean War, after the Second World War, bursts of medical development. And most of the technologies we use come from war, sadly. But the metals, the trauma techniques, the hemostatic techniques, the demand, the early adoption of technologies. Just look at the use of drones in Ukraine. A lot of that stems driven by war. I wanted to know who the inventors were. So, because, you know, in God we trust, everyone else brings data. And I took the entire membership of the SIO Society. I was running the annual meeting, and 6,000 people, and I cross-referenced their names with patent filings at the USPTO and PCT. And I found 447 inventors amongst the 6,000 people with 2,500 patents. And then I built social network maps. And the first time I did this in 2010, I needed their permission. I needed to ask them questions. And you saw key places like Stanford, Hopkins, UPenn, etc., pop up in the maps. But the key role of individuals, and individuals who move, bring cultures with them and bring cultures in their new hospitals. I then repeated that in 2019 and found even more patents, even more invention, and it's a huge work. But this time I was able to build much, much better social network maps, and I didn't need anyone's permission. And I wanted to find out were the same trends possible. So 33% of the inventors are immigrants, disproportionately by comparison to their percentage in society. In fact, something like 30 or 40% of US Nobel Prize winners are immigrants. So all this anti-immigration stuff really, I'm an immigrant, right? Really bothers me. And we're intellectual immigrants. We travel to learn, to gain new information, a very ancient thing to do. So you see the same role as key institutions, and institutions that do not take foreign medical graduates do badly in terms of innovation. Those that do well. Places like UPenn, who around the 1930s and 40s took a lot of Jewish physicians who were escaping the Nazis, have more innovation than places like University of Michigan, who are relatively xenophobic, or Yale. But so this was interesting. Now, peak creativity occurs during fellowship. We compared residency to fellowship to staff positions. So fellowship is the window in which people were able to develop this muscle, as it were, the most. Because they were in a milieu that enabled them to translate their thought into an object, and then had the social network in that place be taken seriously by industry. Because when they leave and go to their next hospital, you know, Barry, Thunder Bay, wherever, they don't have that social network. They have no support. There is no team. And no matter what talent they have, it's very, very rare in that context then to be listened to by industry, to be able to raise funds for your idea, to be able to follow through on your device. Okay. So I looked at this carefully, and 0.6% of the membership have 62% of the patents. So I've been interviewing these people, and there'll be a blog about that. I never blogged, but we're going to do that, and we're going to talk to them. And that's interesting because I know most of these people, they're disproportionately male. I had to justify in my book why there are so few women, biologically female people in the amongst the inventors. So I spoke to all of my friends in the society who are not male, and I learned that there was a lot of sexism and a lot of old boys club stuff going on, and people being excluded from opportunities endemically, systemically in the society and in academic centers. So I made an equation for this, and because I was reading a lot about Schrodinger, and he loved equations. And so innovation is equal to the percentage of inventors in society times small amounts of money times cultural alignment over time. The thing here is timing is a killer. We can't do anything about that. There's a window for every technology.
Okay, let's go.
You can miss the window, unfortunately, you know? So the number of inventors are critical. We have to recruit inventors, or there is no engine to drive the system. We can keep giving money to places like Mars, and no new ideas will emerge from it because it's basically a real estate project, you know? And it won't, but like, I'm a big fan of that. Have any of you had a sushi burrito? They're fantastic. You know, that's my idea of inventorship from somebody who does what they talk about and practices what they talk about. We've been eating sushi with chopsticks for years, a little box, and wasabi and the ginger, and you have to sit down and sauteing, it's a big mess. And, you know, the soy sauce and stuff. And then somebody decides, I'm tired of cutting that roll. I'm just going to wrap it and you're going to stand there and eat it. That's brilliant. That's the kind of stuff I like. Now, if you give that to an academic researcher, he'll go, oh, we need better chopsticks. We're going to make better carbon fiber chopsticks. We're going to coat them in something adhesive. So now you've got a combined drug device. That's a nightmare from the FDA perspective. And it just doesn't work. So sushi burrito, great example. So creativity in all sorts of fields. But people in dry cleaners, people who during COVID received money for Perspex screens or other creativity, that's where the money should be going to, not just Mars. Small amounts of money, not big amounts of money. $2, $5, $10, $15,000. Cultural alignment. Are you in a place that will adopt your idea? Are you in the right milieu? Just like a bumblebee, a wasp, whatever, like the rocky seashore ecology in a pond, you want to make sure you're in the right milieu. So be very careful where you work. And if you're working in the wrong place, leave and go somewhere else and do the most difficult thing you can do. Timing, unfortunately, like as in humor, is critical and it's beyond our control. Genealogy, I told you about. Friendships. You know, I think friendships are really important. If you're surrounded by people whose horizon is a golf club or a skiing resort and an M-Class BMW, you're screwed. You know, you want to be surrounded by people who are pissed off by diseases, who are restless, who are irritated by things, and for whom things don't make sense, who are restless intellectually. And not to the point of neurosis or other issues, but you want to be with people who feel they have a burning responsibility to make a difference. I mentioned about regret. Regret is something that led Cushing to develop the anesthesia record. It led Ridley to develop the lens implant for cataract. It led the cable filter chap, Greenfield, developed that filter. It's responsible for 2 or 3 of my devices. It is fun to do this stuff. One other thing I haven't discussed, self-experimentation. We all do it. I am the cheapest guinea pig there is. I have no rights, but I do give myself informed consent. And, I developed gadolinium enhanced MRA on myself with Martin Prince and Jim Meany, and we bolused contrast into each other several nights in a row at Michigan until we got the right timing and case space, etc. That was a hoot. My pill that blocks DNA damage from exposure, I drew my blood, radiated my blood, measured P53 and H2AX breaks, then repeated that with different formulations till I got it right. If you look at other crazy examples, Werner Fossman did the first right heart catheterization on himself. 9 people at the Pasteur Institute who died from injecting vaccines into themselves. Don't recommend that. Clearly a bad idea. But self-experimentation is really common. Sustaining rejection by your colleagues is really important. The developer of laparoscopic surgery, Kurt Sem, was sent for a head CT by his colleagues because they thought laparoscopic surgery was such a bad idea. They thought he must have a brain tumor. They used to unplug his slides before he presented in case he corrupt the minds of young, impressionable students. Ridley, with the cataract lens, had to meet people under a street lamp in a parked car because his hospital wouldn't let him work on that concept. Rejection by people really, really common. I think picking the right environment to work in is probably one of the most important things you can do. And if you're really driven, I think you have to look outside Canada. I don't know how to stop that sound, but looking outside Canada would be important, particularly for your master's, because you may find there's an institution that gives you a different threshold, ceiling, higher, I don't know, a higher level of achievement, a greater plane that you can get to. So don't be afraid to do that. It could be in England, it could be Cambridge, it could be Oxford. There are very few places you go to. There's about 20 in the world. Charité in Berlin, Gustave Roussy in Paris. But, you know, University of Singapore, Sydney, there aren't that many places anymore because the rising level of mediocrity and lack of government investment in creativity is such that globally there are very few places able to make a difference. So, you know, just choose carefully where you go to. Anything else I should say to you? Let me just, I made some notes, which I haven't looked at. Isolation I mentioned to you. Not much. I think that's it. So the issue of isolation is important. Think of Newton on his farm during the Black Death for 3 years alone, or Darwin on that boat for 5, 6 years. Take that time in the morning to be able to reflect deeply and think about your idea and nuance it, and find a good partner to work with in a good lab where there's a caring environment and people are compassionate. That's about all I'd say. Thank you.